I've seen a lot of anime, like at least 2 of them, and out of those 2, my favorites have got to be Neon Genesis Evangelion and Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann, which many people might think is kinda weird. They're both mecha anime produced by Studio Gainax about a young man who starts off shy, scared, and kind of depressed, and they have really good opening songs. But other than that, to the average viewer, they could not feel more different. Because of their differences, these 2 stories are often talked about as if they're in opposition to each other. In the past, I had seen people say that Eva is better because it feels more real and intellectual, while Gurren Lagann is dumb and stupid. And more recently, I've been seeing people say that Gurren Lagann is better because its more optimistic worldview is superior, while Eva is just depressing. But I would like to convince people that these 2 shows actually work together in harmony in a cool way, and so we can all get along and enjoy both of these anime. First, I'll expand on what makes these shows feel different on a surface level. Evangelion is bleak, exploring the trauma of the entire cast and how it affects their interactions with one another, and then ending after an apocalypse leaves the world unrecognizable. It also makes sure to sprinkle in lots of realism, making sure many elements of the world are properly explained, even though they don't really need to. Yeah, this is a robot shooting a giant laser sniper rifle at an alien, but we have to explain that all of Japan's electricity is necessary to power it. We see the entire setup necessary for it to work. We even get to see some bureaucracy.
Let's be reasonable here.
Everything feels like it has some complex internal logic. Gurren Lagann is explicitly against logic, and specifically avoids explaining how certain things work in order to make room for the hypest shit ever. Everything that happens primarily makes sense emotionally, and the show rides its emotional resonance through its entire run, growing and growing until we have robots throwing galaxies at each other, and then ending on a bittersweet but hopeful and victorious note. Both series end on a beach, but Gurren Lagann's is like this, and Evangelion's is like this. But everyone who likes both of these shows knows that there is a common element shared between them that really makes Gurren Lagann feel like the spiritual successor to Eva, not the opposite. It largely comes from the similarities between the main characters. Shinji and Simon both start with S, and that stands for sad, which is a reference to how both characters start off their respective series as loner, emo, beach house, slowed plus reverb sad boys. Neither of them have dreams or aspirations, they don't have many positive human connections, and they don't have much of an idea that their current conditions can improve. Both are scarred by the trauma of loss and abandonment in Shinji's case. Gurren Lagann's first episode manifests this depression in the setting, a cave underground in which the inhabitants have lived for so long they have forgotten the surface exists. They are so trapped in darkness that escaping to the light seems absurd. It's an obvious reflection of Simon's mind and an obvious similarity to Shinji's. When a character is set up like this, the story is setting up the possibilities of exploring why the character is the way they are, how their depression affects their worldview and actions in the story, and what could make them better. Both Eva and Gurren Lagann explore these possibilities as central elements of their stories. They are both broadly stories about the main character overcoming hopelessness. So, if you took everything away from either of these shows, other than the main arc of the protagonist, would they be the same story? Well, no. They would still clearly feel very different from each other. So, what makes them feel so different? Let's first look at how Simon's arc is handled. Don't get me wrong, Simon's arc is a struggle. It takes him a large portion of the show to gain his own agency, and his journey is marred with loss, failure, and a depressive spiral at one point. But when he has an important revelation, he tends to stick with it for the rest of the show. That's part of what makes him such an inspirational character. When he learns a lesson, he is able to apply it to his life and change himself for the better. And these improvements are constant through the show, always building on top of each other as Simon grows as a person. This constant growth is tied into Gurren Lagann's most basic symbols of the drill and the spiral, starting at one point and continuously growing. Shinji does not have that same constant growth. Contrary to what certain people on the internet might have you believe though, Evangelion is not a show about how everything in the world sucks and being alive sucks and we should all just kill ourselves already. People who say stuff like that are backed by the Illuminati and lizard people, so they should not be trusted. Eva does explore many reasons that could make people think those things. Human connection is hard, suffering under the weight of others' expectations is hard, being alive in this world filled with problems is hard. But Evangelion tells us to remember that anywhere can be paradise, as long as you have the will to live, because as long as you are alive, there is hope that you will find happiness. Shinji realizes this towards the end of the movie, like they literally say what I just said. And then Shinji chooses to continue living despite the world having been destroyed and despite the possibility of being hurt by others, fueled purely by the hope that if he does find another human, he might be able to make a real connection with them. There aren't many things more positive and hopeful than that. Shinji's journey to reach that conclusion, though, often involves him going back and forth between improving and returning to his old ways. Evangelion is a story of Shinji constantly getting himself hyped up for the job, managing to actually connect with people, and making small but still impressive personal growth, only to eventually be torn down again by some new horrible event occurring or his own internal hangups coming back to him. Usually a combination of both, actually. The only thing consistent about his growth is inconsistency. Some might say that this makes Eva less satisfying as a narrative, or that it assumes a view of personal growth that is unnecessarily negative. But fans of the show would probably say that this just makes Shinji a more realistic character. Many people get those pep talks, they manage to make connections with people, they genuinely feel like they have learned a life lesson and that they are ready to face the world. But then they still fail. Something out of their control messes up their expectations, or they find that they still just aren't able to do what they thought they had learned to do. And to experience such failure after feeling like you had finally fixed part of yourself makes it hurt even more. There are so many lessons that I learned and realized during the quarantine, and I thought I was ready to apply all of them to my life once the world was opened back up, because I'm still a naive child, and I kind of thought that I had fixed myself completely. But when I went back to school in person, I still found myself struggling to talk to people, still worrying about the perceptions of others, and still struggling with self-confidence. Even just thinking back to the Wonder Egg priority video I made, I recognize that I haven't completely followed through on the goals I set for myself back then. I am still not very good at being a friend. Gurren Lagann, just like the pep talks Shinji gets in Eva, can make you feel like you are fixed. That, like Simon, you've changed yourself in some positive way, and that you'll be improved in that way for the rest of your life. But sometimes, you still fail. You still fail a lot, and it crushes you. And I think that's one of the most powerful things Evangelion portrays. In that way, Eva is just more real than Gurren Lagann, because despite how hard it was for Simon to learn the lessons that he learned, real life is usually even harder. People don't usually get on the path to self-improvement and stay on it permanently. It's almost always a gradual process in which they often temporarily revert to old behaviors or fail to live up to their ideal goals for certain periods of time. The path to what we want to become or achieve is filled with progress and regression, both repeated many times at different magnitudes. So if Evangelion is a more realistic portrayal of growth, does that mean it's better than Gurren Lagann? Would Simon's character have been more compelling if his story was more similar to Shinji's? No. Shut the fuck up, idiot. That is not what I'm saying. Actually, I would say that I like Gurren Lagann more than Eva. Why? Well, these two shows are not trying to be the same thing. While Evangelion intends to be a realistic portrayal of personal struggle and growth based on the director's own experiences with depression, Gurren Lagann is meant to be the ideal version of a person's growth. The way that Simon changes and then sticks by that change for the rest of the series is what we should all aspire to be. Like him, we should try to stay consistent with the ways we have found to improve ourselves and the world around us. But we often fail to stay consistent, and that's where I think Evangelion becomes important. Shinji is stuck in a cycle of progress and regression throughout most of the series, but in the end, he still chooses to live and keep trying to improve. And that's something from Eva which I think is helpful to apply to your own life. You're not always going to be able to constantly improve, but what matters most is that you keep your will to do it, despite all your failures. But also, I think it's wrong to say that either series is better than the other based on these differing narrative choices. It makes perfect sense to say that you prefer one over the other. You might like Evangelion more because it portrays growth in a more grounded way that you can relate to more, or you might prefer Gurren Lagann because you enjoy seeing the idealized version of your own personal growth and see it as something to look up to. But to imply that either Evangelion's realistic approach or Gurren Lagann's idealistic approach is objectively a better narrative choice just seems wrong to me, because these narratives are not in opposition to each other. They serve distinct yet unified purposes. Gurren Lagann is an inspirational piece, in my opinion, the ultimate one, as it points us towards achieving the perfect life, perfect society, perfect whatever, and at the same time shows us an ideal example of personal growth in the form of Simon, who we can and should all look up to. But even Gurren Lagann recognizes that things don't always go perfect. Despite our will to improve, we still fail to make the best choices, or we lose people, and we can't bring them back. But then we have Evangelion, there to ground us in the worst of times, and tell us that it is normal to fail, or to regress, or be defeated. It is okay to not constantly improve, as long as you don't give into despair, and as long as you eventually pick yourself up and continue to struggle. Because as long as you continue to live, there is always hope that your drill might finally pierce the heavens. Thank you for watching and all that stuff.
Thank you for watching this video.
If you agree with me.
Any additional thoughts you have in the comments.
Just comment what you think about these two shows.
I would love to hear if you agree with me. But also, if you like these shows, you should comment that too. I like hearing people talk about things that they like.
Yeah.
I'm going to make another video at some point, and when that gets released, I hope you're there to listen to me again. Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Also, Chainsaw Man.
Oh, also remember to watch Chainsaw Man. It's going to start airing soon.
Bye.